and welcome to Roar. I'm coming into you from Watermill, New York, which is out on the east end of Long Island. And usually we would be all gathering at some great spot, drinking some fine wine, probably from Argentina, hugging and socializing and celebrating the publication of a new book. But welcome to the COVID-style book party. I'm Michael Clinton. And while I know a lot of you on this Zoom call, there are many new friends and supporters, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining today for some Roar insights, thoughts, and ideas, and for purchasing your copy of the book. Just a quick commercial message before we start. We launched 2 weeks ago with some amazing media from Forbes and Reuters and Esquire and Oprah and AARP and PBS, and tomorrow morning I'll be on CBS Morning if you want to tune in. And we've sold a lot of books, hitting #1 on Amazon's self-help books for 2021, giving Roar a bestseller moniker. So thank you for your great support. And thank you for continuing to spread the word, and feel free to give a review on Amazon if you'd like. Let me tell you a little bit about the birth of Roar. It really started as what I call a last lecture when I was leaving my day-to-day job, and I had my management team of about 150 people, and I wanted to leave them with some thoughts and some ideas about their future. And so it was literally a 16-minute lecture before our meeting started. And then I began to think about it in the broader context as I was planning to step out of the day-to-day of a 42-year magazine career. I began to think more about what life could and should be like for those who are over 50. And I realized that there was a wasteland of content that was all about winding down as opposed to what I call winding up. So much of what I read was outdated and not relevant, certainly not how I wanted to live and how many of you don't want to live. I began to realize that we needed a reframing of our minds, that the culture actually needed a reframing of its mind, because we've been handed a construct that no longer works. Government policies like the retirement paradigm was created in the 1930s when life expectancies hovered around 60. You left work and you didn't live much longer. The idea of leaving work to do as little as possible for as long as possible is no longer a viable option, especially as we all live longer and healthier lives. So I set out on a mission to think about what might be in the second half of life, and along the way, I interviewed 40 incredible people who I call the Reimagineers. In fact, I noticed one of them, Ginny Donahue, is joining us on the call today. These are the role models for all of us. And I began to realize that we're at the beginning of a movement led by the people who are going to reshape everything, and the government, corporations, and institutions will have to respond to all of us. So what's today's promise in our little session here as you're joining me for a lunch? First of all, you'll leave here with some inspiration and ideas to reimagine the next chapter of your life, because the headline here is if you're 50 and healthy or 60 and healthy, you may live to be 90 or even 100. In fact, in 2019, there were 90,000 centenarians in this country. There'll be almost 600,000 by 2060, and they will be 3.5 million by 2100. So living a very long life is not going to be a novelty anymore, nor is hitting 100. Now, not everyone is going to reach that level, but you've got to be healthy and take care of yourself, but it's coming. There are even the super centenarians, those who are going to hit 110. Advancements in medicine and aging biology are studying ways to target aging cells called senescent cells by removing them from the healthy cells to let you live longer. Companies like Calico, Google funded, and now AbbVie are involved, focused on age and age-related diseases. Longevity is their scientific pursuit. So many people are discovering at, let's say, 65, that after that year or two of the retired life of freedom and doing what they want, they're now beginning to realize that they may have another 20 years of life ahead of them. And that's not only being amplified by the pandemic, but there are now 10,000 people turning 65 every single day, joining the boomer ranks of those who are 65 plus, and now beginning to rewrite the script. And by the way, there are 73 million boomers that are still out there. So what we thought we were supposed to do in living forward is all being blown up. There are some bright spots ahead of us. The New York Times story last week on intergenerational housing, a rethink of what nursing homes should be and how we can live at home longer, and a call to action to break down the language and images and policies of ageism. We've got to go from retire to rewire. What should a lifelong process be that we can start at any time? We've got to get rid of words like midlife crisis and say midlife awakening, because we know so much about ourselves. I hate 60 is the new 40. I say 60 is the new 60. And how do we embrace what 60 can look like today, and 70 and 80? The MIT Age Lab is working on public and private solutions around aging. And what they say is that the infrastructure of an aging society needs to be completely rebuilt based on what we are living today and what we'll be living in the next decades. And the spending power of people 60 plus is a market that is now $15 trillion, nearly double that from 2010. And that's from the Global Coalition of Aging. So if we're going to live longer, what do we do with this incredible gift of time? Well, we can have a second career or a third career. We have an opportunity for that second chance. It's something we put on the back burner. We can start a business. The fastest growing cohort of entrepreneurs, according to the Kauffman Foundation, is those people 55 to 64. We can have a child at 50. You can adopt children at 53. My friend Bev is a great example of that. She and her husband adopted 2 boys at 53. You can start a new lifestyle or relationship. You can run marathons. Falja Singe, who I wrote about in the book, ran his first marathon when he was 82. The possibilities are endless, and the possibilities are your individual choice as to how you want to live the second half of your life. Now, I'm going to pause here. As you can see, I'm passionate about the topic. And I know that all of you who have been thinking about this are also passionate about the topic. And I'm going to, later on, we're going to take some questions and some comments on the subject. This was me in the Simien Mountains of Ethiopia just before the pandemic with my adventure crew, my travel crew. I'm going to pause for a minute because someone said, are we all muted? And I don't know what that means. There seems to be some interference on the line. Oh, good question, Marissa. We'll ask those to mute so there's no interference on the line. So for those of you who know me, I'm in constant motion to explore new ideas and to build an interesting and exciting life. My goal with ROAR is to be a voice in what a newly crafted second half of life is like. And I'd like all of you to join me in this movement, both in your personal lives and also in helping to redefine what a second half of life can be. Chapter 8 in the book talks about the process of life layering, something that I started when I was in my 30s, but you can start that at any time in your life. One of my layers was to build a layer of adventure in my life, and that including climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and climbing mountains around the world and running marathons all over the world. And so I've now got a 25-year layer of adventure travel and adventuring that is part of how I identify myself. I think a great way is to create the portfolio life. For me, I'm consulting with my company that I left before at Hearst. I'm serving on nonprofit boards. I've got my own foundation, as many of you know, part owner of Vineyard in Argentina. I just finished a master's degree at Columbia. Phew. But I think this notion of a portfolio life and an active life, for all of us who walk the walk and talk the talk, we are going to be the ones who will redefine what a second half of life can look like. So if you're over 45 and you're tuning in and you want to refire the second half of your life, then you are in the right place. Because some of the things that I talk about now and what we're going to talk about here in a few minutes is how you can start something right now, like rekindling a dream from your young adult self or just starting a new journey. And there were a couple of people who I interviewed in the book who I thought were really amazing individuals. One was a woman by the name of McGarvey Black, who was a sales executive her entire career, and she had always wanted to be a writer. And she went back to her younger adult self, and in her 50s started taking writing courses and seminars and wanted to become a mystery writer. And after 170 rejections of her novel, she ended up getting a publisher, published her first novel. She's now in her mid-60s. She's on her 5th novel, and now she's defined herself as a novelist for the rest of her life. So she went back to her younger adult self to find a new journey. Another person who I loved, who I interviewed, was a woman named Susan Black, who was a longtime hospitality executive. And what she did is she began to start a whole new business called Wowsitude, which was targeted to older folks who were in nursing homes primarily during the pandemic. And that was having them all learn how to use Zoom and all talk to each other, even though they were all down the hall from each other, and build programming so that they could interact and interface with each other. And now she's got hundreds of hours of programming, and she's taken this business and is licensing it out to other organizations and nursing homes, et cetera. And just a great example of starting an entire new journey in her early 60s. So how do you start that process? What are the best practices? And many of the examples are in the book, but focusing on it, identifying it. Everyone who I talked to, these great reimagineers, said they spent a year really going deep into themselves to find out about what it is that they wanted to change and do in terms of their new dream, and also to test the ground on how they might pivot out by creating a bit of a parallel life. The other thing is you can stay in your job and continue to work and pivot in and learn new things and stay and work longer, with your existing company, but you have to decide what it is that you want to do. The great retirement and the great quit that we're all hearing about is forcing companies to think about how they will fill in the gap, especially as people over 50 decide that they're going to join the great retirement. And so that gives you an opportunity for new ways to work, new ways to construct a business day, new ways to work with your employer. So what I would say is rekindle a dream or start a new dream and start a new journey. And the book has lots of examples of that. The other thing you might do is to start a new career or an entirely new professional direction. And there are all kinds of tools like the SWOT analysis and Myers-Briggs and lots of resources in the book where you can do that. And one of my great examples in the book is a woman named Stephanie Young, who at the age of 53 decided after 25 years as a book editor that she wanted to become a doctor, which obviously is a very interesting and new big journey. She went back to school, undergraduate school, and took biology and organic chemistry and all of the things that you need to do to take the MCATs. She did confront ageism in the American medical school system. So she went to the Caribbean and became a medical student down there. And in her 60s, she became a doctor. And thinking about her long life, she said at 62, I can be a doctor for 25 years or 30 years and make an enormous contribution. And so why shouldn't we think about ways that we can start new careers at 50, at 60, and even 70? Because a lot of contribution can be made for 10, 15, 20 years in a new career of your choice. Neil Lubin, who is the outgoing dean of the business school at Pace University in New York, who is 68, he and two 76-year-olds are launching a new business. It's a streaming business in the healthcare space. And they're out getting investors and they're out, talking to ways that they can launch this new business. And they're great examples of those who are living the Roar life. There are lots of trends in philanthropy as well. As many of you know on the call, I just finished my master's degree in nonprofit philanthropy at Columbia, and I've learned a lot. And one of the things that we know is that there's going to be the biggest transfer of generational wealth in the history of the world over the next 20 years. The baby boomers will transfer over $60 trillion worth of assets to the next generation, which has huge implications for philanthropy and for giving back. But I would also suggest it has great implications for those who have the resources and that are in their second half to spend that money now, have a big social impact, create scholarships for underprivileged communities, start new businesses, start new 501c3s, create something called social purpose businesses to really make an impact in the second half of your life. There's an enormous amount of opportunity, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about what those mean and how they can play out. In midlife, sometimes people are also saying, am I in the right relationship? Should I start dating again? With the pandemic, couples have spent more time with each other than they probably have in their entire adult life, because they were all in their house or in their apartment, spending time together. And so the question becomes, through this existential experience that we went through, am I with the right partner? That's a personal decision. But also now is the time to be thinking about what does love and romance and relationships look like at 50 plus. One of the great stories that I talk about in the book is the NPR interview with, he's 104, she's 100. They're a new couple. She basically says, I wake up every morning and I look over to see if he's breathing. And if he is, we're going to have another great day together. And I love that story, because romance never stops. One of the questions in the survey that we did in the book was, if you could choose fewer years to have more romance in your life, or longer years just to have a relationship that bumped along, which would you choose? Surprisingly, many people chose the romance in their life. So we know that, that's still an important part of the 50 plus life. My friend Lori, who lives in San Francisco, who may be on this call, is a great example. She was a widow in her early 70s. She's now in her mid 70s, and she's enjoying an incredible new relationship with someone new that is in her life, that she's enjoying great time with him. And she's, when she talks about it, you can hear her spark up. So there are lots of ways that you can meet people through friends, but certainly those of us who didn't grow up as digerati sometimes have reservations about going online dating to eHarmony or Silver Singles or Match.com. But that is how people meet. And my friend Jane met her husband that way. And my friend Steve, who is getting divorced, is now dating and meeting amazing women that way. We just all have to go with that flow, because that's how it's all working now. And at this point, pursuing both companionship and partnership and love should never be put on the back burner as we move into our second half. Now let's talk about learning and going back to school. And I think one of the things that is amazing is lifelong learning has to be a part of everything that we do. You don't have to go and get a degree like me, but there are an enormous amount of certificates and something called MOOCs. If you haven't heard of MOOCs, mass open online courses, many of them that are free, that you can learn and new things, whether you want to learn about digital marketing or you want to learn about something new as a hobby. But Malcolm Gladwell says it takes 10,000 hours to master a new skill. 9 years, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. You can do it. What's your passion? What's your creative gene? What do you want to learn? One thing you might want to check out is something called the Nexel Collaborative, which is a collection of higher education institutions that are committed to midlife transformations. Everything from the Advanced Leadership Institute at Harvard to the University of Minnesota, which is a public university system where you can spend a year taking courses, having mentors, having guidance counselors, almost like you did when you were younger, to help you figure out what you want to do in your midlife and transforming yourself to another place. One of the great things I like about the creative gene is that when you think about Grandma Moses, she didn't start painting until she was 77. She lived to be 101. In the beginning, she sold $5 paintings. Now you may know that she sold Sugaring Off for $1.2 million, which sold for auction after she died. Delia Owens wrote When the Crawdaddy Sings, her first novel, when she was 70. Frank McCourt wrote Angela's Ashes in his 60. And by the way, won the Pulitzer Prize. So your creative gene, whatever that is, you can start it at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. You can be a writer, a painter, a creator, and it can fulfill you. You can turn it into a business, and you can always learn something new. So I'm all for lifelong learning and always being a student as a dynamic way to live in the second half of your life. And then also, finally, I would say, create a new lifestyle, venture into a whole new way of living. And by the way, I love these images that we were able to find of dynamic people that are 50 plus, because it is a sad state when you look at images of people 50 plus in marketing and advertising, and we need to call that out, because oftentimes they're not shown in very active, dynamic ways. And these images that we found as we're preparing this. But creating a new lifestyle or venture out into a whole new way of living, has to start first with one of my favorite chapters in the book, which is own your numbers, own your health numbers, own your financial numbers, get your house in order for your final number so that you can have a new lifestyle or venture out. And my mantra is, let's all make life bigger, not smaller, because the tendency as we live longer and we age is that we like to make our lives smaller. And so build that dream house at 70, spend that money, again, social impact and important things in terms of giving back to the community. Stay in place instead of moving to a retirement state where you're living with everybody who is your same age, as opposed to having a dynamic interaction with people who are in their 20s and 30s and young parents and young couples and single people, and having a more dynamic lifestyle in general. Do something that's daring and new that you've never done before. When I was in my 50s, my daring was I ended up, as some of you know, to run 7 marathons on 7 continents. And I was proud as I celebrated my 60th birthday to run a marathon on Antarctica, which was a whole other experience of something that I'll think about for the rest of my life. And also think about, time, and time is a prioritization. There's this thing where people who are post 50 who like to say, I've never been busier than ever. And when you get under the hood and they say, well, I had a really busy day. I went to the dry cleaner, I picked up the laundry, I took a nap, and you realize that you frittered that day away on a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily moving you forward in a productive and in a unique kind of way. So I'm all for taking time and really putting it to work for you in the things that you want to do and you want to experience, because you are going to live this very long and potentially productive life if you want that. So the manifesto of Roar: become the example of a long life well lived in new and imaginative ways. Those of us who are in that cohort, we're rewriting the script, we're becoming the role models for who will be the future dynamic people plus 50. We will be the ones who will recreate what it means to live long and healthy and productive and exciting lives. And that's the message of Roar. And we're going to take that message out and create a Roar community to gather up stories of people who are doing it, take on institutions and policies that prevent that, and really become a bit of an activist group in trying to make sure that the world is responding to the things that we are interested in doing as the new kind of 50 plus person, not just in the US, but all over the world. So with that, I will say that was a good 26 minutes, and hope I wasn't too much of a talking head, but any questions or any comments or anything that anybody wants to put in the chat or in the Q&A, let's get into some short conversation. I like this one that Marie said, most of my retired friends are boring. I feel like I need new friends. You bet, Maurice, let's go out and make some new friends. And let's find some friends who are not just in our own age group, but are younger and are interested in learning what we're going to do. Kathleen, who is at the University of Minnesota, who I had the pleasure with talking to last week or so, she just put in the chat what the Nexel Collaborative is, which I might tell you is a 501c3, once again, really focused on midlife transformation, and not just the University of Minnesota, but we have Notre Dame and Stanford, and maybe Kathleen will put a couple of other schools in there that I'm forgetting that are a part of the Nexel Collaborative. But a lot of this stuff is stuff that you can do online as well. Okay, let's see. We got a couple of other comments, questions. I think one of the things that hold people back is fear of failure. Would you speak to that? I think one of the things that we all know, if we've lived 45, 50 years, is that we know what failure is. We've all had failure, right? And so failure is something that we now have learned how to cope with, and we've learned how to digest and use as a tool to move us forward. And I think the first thing we have to do is not get tied up in the woulda, coulda, shoulda. The thing that I did an interview with a psychologist, Dr. Parsons, who talked about how people in midlife, because of failure, get into negative self-talk. And I think that that's really, you know, I didn't do this, I didn't get the promotion, I failed on that, I failed in a partnership, in a marriage, whatever. And so, you know, what I think that we know is that failure, you know, can eat us up inside, but we have to let it go, and we have to find ways to manage it. What Dr. Parsons says is surround yourself with the people who think you're the most fabulous person around. And, you know, surround that positive energy around you so that it helps to navigate out of that negative self-talk. I see my friend Fernando is on the call, who he and I ran, as well as others, the Antarctica Marathon together, and he's turning 49 next month and running Chicago the same day. So thanks, Fernando. It's great to hear from you and to see your name pop up. I'm missing some of the scroll up there, Gina, if you have any questions you want to pull out.
We had some questions that were sent in previously to Michael. So from Nora, she said she wants to go back to school, but she's getting a lot of resistance from her grown sons. And do you have any advice on how to talk to family members to be more supportive?
Yeah, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. I think, you know, you're reassessing your relationships chapter talk about this. I mean, you have to sit down and explain to the people in your inner circle, your family and your loved ones, that how this is important to you. I'm not so sure why her sons would be so resistant to wanting mom to continue to grow and expand, you know, in her own life. Maybe it's because some of the things that you know, I don't know how old they are, but are they afraid it's going to take time away from them, their mom time? But, you know, I think it's that good old fashioned sit down to explain why it's important, And the thing that you have to also ultimately do is you have to be true to yourself and follow your North Star in terms of the things that are important to you. And that's a big headline from this book. And my mother, who I wrote about in the book, is a great example of that. And I see my friend Sharon Wilkes, who I haven't seen in many, many years, says she's launching a luxury handbag collection under her own label this weekend in the Hamptons after a hiatus of 22 years when she went and got a law degree at 51. After designing my daughter's wedding a few years ago, I realized I had to get back to my passion, which is designing. And we met many, many years ago when she was a fashion designer. So Sharon, you are roaring on. Congratulations. That's really great. I want to get back to this notion of the things that are your own passion. And Carl, I'll answer your question in a minute. You know, the one thing that I learned in all these interviews is that the people who did not follow their own North Star had a bit of I'll say meltdown in their midlife. And they realized that they were on a course doing whatever they were doing that was really off what was their dream and their purpose. And they had to course correct, and the people in the book did course correct. And you read or you will read about some of them. One of my favorites is a guy whose father said he'll only pay for his college education if he studied business. And this guy really wanted to be in the social work, social justice space. And at 50, he had that meltdown, and he went off and did the ayahuasca ceremony in Peru, which some of you might know. And he saw himself, his 16-year-old self, across the pond in his sort of hallucinogenic state. And he said, "I'm so sorry that I abandoned you." And that was a very poignant moment, obviously. And he came back and he quit his business career and started a project called the Fluid Project, PHLUID, which is around gender identity. And he's thriving in that. And so he course corrected to be true to himself. And I think that is really that North Star. That mom who wants to go back to school has to ultimately tell her kids that she has to be true to herself. when Carl says portfolio life, how do we decide which projects would be best to pursue first when we have multiple options? I think it's a question of, prioritizing. What are the things that are the most important to you? I like the idea of having, multiple things going on at all times, because that's the way I'm wired. Some people can only take on a couple of things, but I think it depends on if you're working full time or you're not. If you're not working full time, then you have time to build a bigger portfolio life. Are you working because you want to and you need to make some money? Do you want to work part time? Is money not the issue and you just want to chase your passion? I always say start with, one deep interested passion. I'll give you the example. Many people on the call know that I love photography, and I started studying photography 20 years ago, studied the photographers, went to auctions, went to the galleries, became involved in the International Center of Photography, learned everything I could about photography. Ultimately had a photography show. I think Judith is on the call today, and she was an amazing friend and colleague and partner who helped me to do a pop-up show in Soho, led to a book of photography, and on and on. So I've had this life layer of photography for 25 years. And I think that identifying what it is that you really want to become knowledgeable about, expert on, focused on, is the first step into building that portfolio that you can then expand on. So that would be my suggestion to Carl. Let's see, what else, Gina, just because I'm losing track here.
That's okay. Jonine has a question here. This book is inspirational. Thank you, Michael. In your intro, you mentioned an endorsement by the AARP. Do you have plans to engage with other type of senior type groups?
So, I've been out talking to everyone. I mean, I think that, we all know AARP and we all know its positives and it's grown when we get that package. But nevertheless, they do good work. And, AARP, encore.org is another group. The Modern Elder Academy, which is in Baja and now moving into Santa Fe, many of those organizations, exist. But, what I want to carve out is a fresh approach and in a different voice and a complementary voice to the things that they are doing. So I think what I've been learning through this process is that people want to have more of the Roar message in terms of not just inspiration, but guidance and practical things. So what I'm thinking about now is, do we create a Roar community and what should that look like? Post-COVID, does that mean conferences? Does that mean newsletters? Does that mean ways where there are ongoing communications? And so all of that is yet to come. And please, we're going to post where you can contact me if you don't have the information, because I'd love your ideas and I'd love anyone else who is around. So Barbara says, yes, create a Roar community. So thanks, Barbara. And so that's coming, because I think that there's a lot of fresh voice that can come into this as well. And Marissa is asking, I have tons of interest and by nature a lifelong learner. So I tend to want to continuously learn. How do we move that to something productive that can support others as well? So I think that depends on, what it is that you want to learn. I'll give you one great example. There are a lot of great programs on how to become a life coach, how to become an executive coach. For people who are 50 plus, it's a great way to give your wisdom and your guidance and your support to others. And you can set up your own business to do that. So that's one example. Another example is there are all kinds of learning certificates that you can now get online, that some are free, as I said, and some you pay for, but it is a very niche kind of thing where you're learning something new that you can then take into the community. Ginny, who I think is on the call, created an amazing program called On Point in upstate New York. She was a CFO for a corporation, and she created On Point, which ultimately was working in the disadvantaged communities helping kids learn how they can apply through college and get financial support and actually get into college, which many of these kids didn't know how to do. And she started literally in the back of her car, and she learned all the things that she needed to do to help kids to apply for college. And then she ultimately turned it into a very, very successful nonprofit, which lives on to today. Carl's asking if there'll be a community message board categorized by topic. Not sure yet. We're just at the nascent stage of all of this. Okay, I'm losing track of some of the.
Michael, Bennett is asking about the URL, the name of the program at the University of Minnesota that you.
Yeah, so that may have been put in the chat line, but if Kathleen, if you're still here.
Kathleen said she'll add it.
Okay,
oh, nice.
Great, terrific. So yeah, it's a great program. And so you can learn more about, those particular cohorts. Back to the lifelong learning thing, the one thing that I came to realize is that some people say, well, I don't have the time or I don't have the money. And time is something that we all have. It's just we have to figure out how to use our time. And the money is there. There are tons of money through Pell Grants and federal grants, and many states have free university for people that are 60 plus. So there is always something that you can do to find the money. So Carol Kay, who I think this is my childhood friend from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, said, I know you have loved being a mentor. What should people look for when wanting to find a mentor? Did you ever have a bad mentor? I never had a bad mentor because I never let it get that far, but I've had a couple of amazing professional mentors who are still mentors today. I think that, what you look for, or what I looked for, is people who were authentic, who were honest, who could teach me something, who saw something in me that maybe I didn't see. And so I think you can have a mentor at any time in your life. I'm still in touch. Carol knows this. I'm still in touch with our 91-year-old English teacher from high school who is still a mentor in my life in a certain way. So I think you can find mentors of all ages. Haida, hi Haida, says, how important is it to stay in one track to get to a pinnacle before pivoting to other areas? You clearly pursued and perfected your primary craft while layering things like before your pivot. What was the importance of that for you? Yeah, I think that, pinnacle becomes a very personal decision. And so I'll give you an example of someone I interviewed in the book, a dermatologist. She's a world-renowned Mohs surgeon, has a major practice in New York. And, she would say that she potentially had a lot more to do, but she was sort of defined her own sense of pinnacle in terms of where she was. She's just decided to go back to school and become a veterinarian. And she is in her first year of veterinary school. And she's 56. And she said, I'll be a veterinarian when I'm 60. And I want to become an animal activist. And I may do that for 20 years. So I think pinnacle becomes, how much do you feel you have achieved in what would be your first career in your first profession? And, everybody has a different example of that. For me, it was, becoming the president and publishing director of Hearst Magazines was a pinnacle moment in my professional career. And so I was ready to pivot. But some people who are a publisher of a magazine or an editor of a magazine may be wanting to pivot earlier. The other thing is, all of our industries are changing so dramatically. So do we want to pivot out and create something brand new? Or, as I said earlier, do you want to pivot in and learn something new within your company and within your organization? In my world, it was all the print people had to learn what digital was all about in order for them to move forward and to be productive in their future career. So I think pinnacle becomes, you kind of know when you're at that moment where you're done with the career that you set out and you want to pivot out into another direction, which could be related or something completely new. What else, Gina? Anything else from the crowd?
I I think let's talk about those take action pieces, Michael. Oh, wait, there's one more question here from Barbara. Let's do that first.
Yes, can you speak to, I think the word, I think she means,
Increasing energy.
increasing energy as we age. So yeah, I think, this gets back to knowing your numbers. I think a lot of energy comes from good health, comes from good sleep, comes from good fitness, comes from good diet, comes from nutrition, comes from your form of stress relief, meditation, whatever it is that is your version of it. I mean, for me, my form of meditation is moving meditation. I like to go out and do a run, and that to me is a moving meditation. So I think that all of those things working together do create, more energy for us. So part of it is that, and I think part of it is creating those elements all coming together to give more energy. We all know those people. I have a friend, some of you may know Stan Herman, who just turned 93, one of the most energetic people I know. So some of it is certainly is inherent in the personality, but the others can learn it through that alchemy of things. Okay, Gina, back to you.
Let's talk about those take action pieces, Michael. And I'll bring up the slide.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to this notion of owning who you are and where you are in this moment of time, because taking a very realistic assessment of where you are is critical. And that might be getting back to your health and fitness. I used the example of Falja Singe earlier, who started running when he was in his 60s and 70s, and he ran his first marathon when he was 82. And I watched him cross the finish line as the first 100-year-old man to finish a marathon in Toronto. And you don't have to go out and run a marathon, but you have to have some kind of fitness regimen just on the health side, for example. So own who you are means in all aspects of your life. Where are you at this moment? And really then identifying where you want a particular change. Do your own personal SWOT analysis. That is your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. That's an old business model that works for the personal model as well. And there's some explanation of that in the book. It really can be a real beneficial thing for you in terms of your own development. And I think we have one more point that was on there. Yeah, I started to say this, focus on one area to start, and what are the actions you can take to create that plan. In the book, I interviewed this amazing woman, Michelle Morris, who is in Chicago, and she might even be on this call, I'm not sure, but Michelle decided she was going to have a year of change, and she was going to change everything. She was going to change her career, she was going to change her lifestyle, she was going to change her love life. She decided to get all on at once. And good for Michelle. She's a force unto herself. But for most people, I say take on the one area where you want change and start and put in the brain power and the time in dissecting it and beginning to take the action steps that you want to create what is an actionable plan for you to move. And sometimes it's that first baby step that is the most difficult, but it's the one that leads you down to the path. And once again, I think the stories in the book are great examples of people who are doing that. And I'll sort of also talk about this amazing book that I reference in Roar. It's called The 5 Regrets of the Dying, and it was written by a hospice nurse. And as she listened to all these people who were at the back end of their lives, the one thing that kept coming forward was this notion that I wish I had been more true to myself, which gets back to the big theme of Roar. Do the things that are important to you, that make you satisfied and fulfilled. The people around you have to know this is important. And if the people around you don't accept that or support you, then you have to question if those are the right people who should be in your world and your universe. So being true to ourselves and following our North Star is really great. I think we got about 5 more minutes. So it
There's
says,
another question in chat from Kathleen. Do you see that, Michael? Okay.
Yeah. How do you see connecting the generations fitting with your ideas about living fully in the second half? That's a great question, Kathleen. I think the first thing is the breaking down of the ghettoization of people 50 plus, which happens in our culture and less so in other cultures around the world. We all tend to move to retirement communities. We tend to push our older people into nursing homes where they don't necessarily have to go there, or independent living. And the ghettoization of older people creates depression and creates bad health. And we have to find more ways to have intergenerational connections. And part of that is, through university programs where you have people who are 50 plus, who are going into schools and sitting in classes. When I was sitting in my classes at Columbia, I was really jazzed to hear about the young professionals who were in their 30s and the kinds of things that they were doing, and then sharing my wisdom. And we have to sort of blow up the retirement community as a concept. I mean, I think that some of you know that it was that community in Arizona that was started many, many years ago that was sort of the promise of a sunny retirement, but it really was a promise of a lot of sameness and downward spiral, I would say. So we need to have, multi-generational housing. We need to take this retirement community to rethink it and do things like this. David is saying, being true to yourself is a great goal, but how does one know what will actually deliver happiness, fulfillment? What metric did you use? So it's a great question. I don't like the idea of chasing happiness because happiness has so much baggage attached to it that it is a false construct. And when I talked to Dr. Parsons, the psychologist, she agreed that we are too obsessed about the word happy. The obsession I think we should have is satisfaction and fulfillment. So when you identify something, I was fortunate when I learned very early on that I wanted to travel around the world and be an adventure traveler and see things that were around the world. I learned at a very young age, backpacking in Europe when I was 18 years old, by the way, spending all my college loan money, which is another story. But I knew that was something so core to who I was that I was going to be on a lifelong quest to seeing as much of the world as I possibly could. That brought me visceral satisfaction. So the metric was what I would call a soft metric of visceral satisfaction. It made me fulfilled and made me want to do more and do more of it. And so I think that when we identify the things that we think we want to pursue, what it allows us to do is to go deep into it and to explore it and to expand on it. And sometimes, sometimes we go down a path and we do it, and then we're no longer fulfilled by it, and then we move on to the next thing. So I became a pilot. I was a private pilot and flew for 25 years. And then I'm sort of done with that, but it was a great fulfilling experience at the time. And it's just one of my layers that I added to my life over the course of my lifetime. So, that's how I would measure it. There's no hardcore metric per se. I'm seeing that, hi, Lori, please put your question in chat, but we haven't seen that yet. So, we'll see, if that comes through. So let's see. We have a few more. I think we're going to one, right, Gina? So we have anybody. It's 12:52, so we have a couple of more questions if we want. What I'm finding, it's so interesting, is that thanks, Maggie. Fulfillment is the piece. Yeah, thank you. One of the things I'm finding, which is so interesting, the book was really written for people sort of 45 to 65 who were at that sort of midlife pivot and so forth. But I've had so many people tell me that I'm going to have my 20-something-year-old kid read this because I think it's a good roadmap for future thinking, which I thought was really interesting because that wasn't necessarily who I was targeting. But I'm getting feedback from younger people in their 20s and 30s that they're also enjoying the book. So, you know, I think we learn from those who've come ahead of us. You know, I certainly learn from people who come ahead of us. One of the questions in the book is, you know, what's your favorite future? And, you know, when you ask an 80-year-old, what's your favorite future? It's so interesting to hear what their response is, or ask anyone for that matter. One guy who I know, Ed, who is 82, said, well, my favorite future is I want to rewrite my resume and I want to get a job selling luxury boats or airplanes. And I was like, great. You know, this to me is like the role model of who it is. So we're going to have, you know, as time goes on, a collection of amazing people who are redefining what it means to be 50, 60, 70, and 80. And, you know, we already have some sort of well-known people in that space. When you think of, you know, I think of Sting, you know, the singer, who's got an incredible, you know, dynamic way about him at 70, or we talk about Jennifer Lopez, or, I mean, look at Lenny Kravitz. He's like rich, right? And he's got a lot of cool things. So Maurice is saying, I'm still working because I love work. Great, but I'm still struggling with work-life harmony. Well, I think the one thing I would say to that, Maurice, is to start building a bit of a parallel experience with your work life. Start using your free time, your weekends, your time off to start building that parallel life. Because I think the thing that I've learned is when you're in a professional seat and you're working, oftentimes your whole identity is wrapped up in that seat. And so when people leave the seat, they become lost. They don't know how to define themselves. And I was always very conscious of this as I was going through my professional career, because the seat was a great seat, but it wasn't who I was. It was the seat that I was renting. So when I stepped out of the seat, I could say, oh, I'm an author, I'm a photographer, I'm an adventurer, I'm a marathoner, I study philanthropy. You know, I had this whole other set of self-definitions. And I think it's important to do that while you're working, as opposed to, as some people say, well, I'll figure it out when I get there. You know, I always say that that's not the right formula. The formula is to do it while you're working, so that when you step out of your seat, you have a lot of self-definition and a lot of interests and a lot of richness that goes on in your life. So yeah, I think you know, start that process now in whatever way you can. Okay, Gina, anything?
William has another question here for you,
okay,
Michael.
I missed that. Go on.
How were you able to balance responsibility and fulfillment? You started your layering when you and had lots of responsibility. I think you meant when you were working, had lots of responsibility.
Yeah. So the way I would answer that is, being in the publishing business, there's a very important skill that you learn, and that skill is called editing. And so I would say that I edited out a lot of the extraneous things that really didn't matter to me, so that the free time that I had was time that I was able to use in my layering and or productive way. So I'll give you an example. You know, Thanksgiving weekend, you know, I sort of had this epiphany many years ago that Thanksgiving weekend, which is a four-day weekend, sometimes 5-day weekend, is basically all around, you know, a meal that you have with family and friends on Thanksgiving Day. Maybe you watch a little bit of football, and then, okay, what's going on with the rest of the weekend, so to speak. So I made the decision a long time ago that I could use that weekend in a much more productive way. So I started telling my family and friends, I'm going to be taking a trip. I'm going to go somewhere for 4 or 5 days. And if you'd like to come with me, you know, come with me. And, you know, I would go to Portugal because it was an easy trip, or I would, you know, use my frequent flyer miles somewhere else. But that's what I mean about, you know, editing your time and how you use your time in ways that are important to you. So that's just one example. All my friends laugh at me, and some of you may pick this up. You know, I don't do brunch. And they all know that, because to me, it's like you go at 11 o'clock and you're there till 2 o'clock and you're drinking in the middle of the day. And you know what? I'd rather be doing something else with my time. So let's go have a coffee later in the day or have a glass of wine. But, I don't want to spend 4 days on a Sunday just, and I realize it's a socializing event, a social event, but it's kind of not for me. So I think editing your time so that you have time to be able to use for the things that you really want to do is so critical to achieving your goals and balancing responsibility and family and your ultimately your own personal goals. So that's how I would answer that question. Okay, 2 minutes. 2 minutes left because I want to be respectful of everybody's time because we said 12 to 1. But so you are now part of the Roar community, people. So be on the lookout for our first newsletter, which I'm, sometime hopefully later in the fall and or first of the year. Gina just put all the social media stuff on the chat, plus roarbymichaelclinton.com, which many of you know because you signed up for this through that mechanism. And listen, we're going to create something which is going to be new and different, and I'm hoping that you'll all become a part of it in one way, shape, or form, as we go on. But I think we are the ones who are going to be the new ones who are identifying what it all looks like moving forward. So thank you all so much for your time. It was great to see so many familiar names and also many new people who I don't know, we've never met, but thank you for participating and asking great questions. And, as I like to say, roar forward, everybody. Thanks so much and have a great weekend coming up. Thanks, everyone.